The moment I saw my mother-in-law's face on my doorstep, flanked by 3 people I'd never met, each dragging a suitcase, I knew exactly what was about to happen. What I didn't know was that within 24 hours, she'd be calling me 17 times in a row, her voice cracking with something I'd never once heard from that woman in 6 years of marriage. Genuine, throat-closing panic. "Ashley, please pick up. What did you do? The card's declining. There's no food in the house. What are we all supposed to eat?" I listened to that voicemail sitting on my childhood bed in my parents' house in Naperville, Illinois, wearing the same hoodie I'd packed in my one suitcase the night before, and I smiled. Not a cruel smile, though I won't pretend there wasn't a sliver of satisfaction in it. It was the smile of a woman who'd spent 6 years bending and bending and bending until the day she finally decided to snap upright. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the version of my life where I genuinely believed I'd won the lottery. 3 years ago, if you'd asked me to describe my life, I would have sounded insufferable, like one of those women on Instagram who posts her coffee with the caption, "grateful," and actually means it. I was 31, married to Brandon Whitfield, 6'2", brown eyes, the kind of jaw that made my college roommate whisper, "Girl, lock that down," when she first met him. We'd been together since I was 24, married at 25, and by 31 we'd built something that felt, real. Not Instagram real, real. We lived in a 3-bedroom ranch in Plainfield, about 40 minutes southwest of Chicago. Nothing fancy, 1,600 square feet, a yard that flooded every spring, an HOA that sent passive-aggressive letters about our recycling bin placement. But it was ours. Well, mostly mine on paper, and I'll get to why that matters later. Brandon worked as an HVAC technician. Good money, honest work, hands that were always a little rough no matter how much lotion I bought him. I was a senior claims analyst at a mid-size insurance company downtown, the kind of job that sounds boring at parties, but paid well, really well. By the time everything blew up, I was pulling in $94,000 a year. Brandon made around $62,000. Together, we were comfortable. Not rich, but the kind of comfortable where you don't check your bank account before buying groceries, where you can say, "Let's just get the good cheese," without doing mental math. Our weekends were simple. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market in Lockport, Sunday football at our place with Brandon's buddy Travis and his wife Megan. I'd make 7-layer dip and pretend to care about the Bears. Brandon would rub my feet during halftime without me asking. We had a joint checking account, a savings account with $47,000 in it, and a retirement plan that our financial advisor Dennis called ahead of the curve for your age bracket. I loved my husband. I want to be clear about that. This isn't one of those stories where I reveal I was secretly miserable the whole time. I loved him in the way you love someone who knows your coffee order, who holds your hair back when you're sick, who once drove 45 minutes in a snowstorm to bring you Tylenol because you sounded weird on the phone. Brandon was kind. Brandon was gentle. Brandon was also, in the way that matters most to this story, completely incapable of standing up to his mother, Linda Whitfield. 63 years old, 5'4", a retired dental hygienist from Joliet with a voice that could cut sheet metal and an opinion about everything I did, from the way I loaded the dishwasher to the thread count of our bed sheets. She wasn't a monster, I want to be fair. She could be warm. She remembered my birthday every year, always got me something thoughtful. A scarf, a book she'd seen me eyeing. She made the best peach cobbler I've ever tasted, and she genuinely adored Brandon in a way that, early on, I found endearing. But Linda had a philosophy about family that I didn't fully understand until it was too late. In Linda's world, family meant her family, her blood, her people. And I was always, no matter how many Thanksgivings I hosted, no matter how many times I drove her to her podiatrist appointments in Bolingbrook, an outsider, a guest in the Whitfield ecosystem who'd been granted a conditional visa. The first few years were manageable. She'd make little comments. "Oh, Ashley, you're using store-bought pie crust? That's fine, I guess." and I'd let them roll off. Brandon would sometimes catch them and give me a look that said, sorry, and that was enough. We had boundaries. She lived 30 minutes away. She visited once or twice a month. It was fine. Then Linda's sister, my aunt-in-law Diane, got divorced. And then Diane's daughter, my cousin-in-law Stephanie, lost her apartment. And then Diane's son, my other cousin-in-law Marcus, got laid off from his warehouse job in Romeoville. And suddenly, Linda's world was full of people who needed saving. And Linda had decided, with the absolute certainty of a woman who has never once questioned her own judgment, exactly where those people were going to land. Our house. But here's the thing. She didn't come to me first. She didn't even come to Brandon first. Not really. She planted seeds, little comments over Sunday dinners at her place that I barely registered at the time. Diane's just so lost since the divorce. Bless her heart. Stephanie's been sleeping on a friend's couch. Can you imagine? At 26? Marcus just needs a few weeks to get back on his feet, that's all. I nodded along. I said, that's tough, and I hope things work out. Because I'm a human being with empathy, and I genuinely felt bad for them. What I didn't realize was that every sympathetic nod was being cataloged, filed away. Ammunition for later. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment the ground started shifting beneath me. It was a Tuesday evening in early October. Brandon came home from work smelling like duct sealant, which was normal. He kissed me on the forehead, which was normal. Then he sat down at the kitchen table, folded his hands, and said something that was not normal at all. So my mom called today. 4 words, innocuous on the surface, but something in his tone, a tightness, a careful neutrality, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I set down the spatula I was holding. I was making stir-fry. I remember the sesame oil sizzling in the pan, the smell sharp and warm. Okay, I said slowly. What about? She had an idea. He paused, swallowed. About Diane and the kids. The kids. Stephanie was 26 and Marcus was 23. Not kids, but that's what Linda called them, because it made them sound more helpless, more deserving of rescue. What kind of idea? I asked. Brandon looked at me with those brown eyes, and I saw something I'd seen maybe 3 times in our entire marriage, guilt that hadn't yet earned its reason. She thinks they should stay with us for a while, just until they get back on their feet. The sesame oil popped. A tiny drop hit my wrist. I barely felt it. All 3 of them, I said, Diane, Stephanie, and Marcus, in our 3-bedroom house? Mom says it would only be a couple months, maybe through the holidays. I stared at him. The stir-fry was starting to burn. I didn't move. Brandon, I said carefully, where exactly would 3 additional adults sleep in our house? We have our bedroom, the office I work from 2 days a week, and the guest room that currently has 1 twin bed in it. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Mom had some thoughts on that too. And that, right there, that sentence, delivered in my kitchen on an ordinary Tuesday while my dinner charred in the pan, was the first domino. I just didn't know yet how many were lined up behind it. I turned off the burner, scraped the ruined stir-fry into the trash, looked at my husband, this man I loved, and felt something cold settle in my stomach, like a stone dropped into still water. Tell me, I said. Tell me all of Linda's thoughts. He couldn't meet my eyes. And in that silence, in the space between his breath and his next word, I heard the faintest crack, the sound of the life I'd built starting to fracture along a fault line I never knew was there. Brandon exhaled through his nose, long and slow, the way he did when he was about to deliver bad news and wanted to package it as something reasonable. Okay, so Mom's thinking Diane could take the guest room. That makes sense, right? She's the oldest. She needs privacy. Stephanie could set up in the office. We could move your desk into our bedroom, maybe put it in the corner by the window. And Marcus, he trailed off. And Marcus, I repeated. The couch, just temporarily. He's a quiet kid, Ash. You'd barely know he was there. I leaned against the kitchen counter. My fingers gripped the edge of the laminate so hard I could feel the seam digging into my palms. Let me make sure I understand this. Your mother wants me to give up my home office, the room I work from twice a week, for my actual job that pays our actual mortgage, so your 26-year-old cousin can have a place to sleep, and your 23-year-old cousin would be living on our couch, in our living room, where we live. It's not permanent. You keep saying that word. Define not permanent. 2 weeks? 2 months? 6 months? Mom said probably through the holidays. It's early October, Brandon. The holidays means Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. That's 3 months minimum. He rubbed the back of his neck. I know it's a lot to ask. You haven't asked yet, I said quietly. You've told me what your mother decided. That landed. I could see it hit him. A flinch. Subtle, but real. The way his jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might actually push back against the whole thing, that he might say, "You're right, this is crazy, I'll tell her no." Instead, he said, "Can you at least think about it?" And because I loved him, because I was still the version of Ashley who believed that marriage meant compromise, that kindness would be rewarded with kindness, I said, "I'll think about it." I thought about it for exactly one night. Lying in bed next to Brandon, staring at the ceiling fan making its lazy rotations, I ran through every scenario. 3 extra adults in 1,600 square feet. My office dismantled. My work-from-home days disrupted. Sharing a single bathroom with 5 people instead of 2. The grocery bill, the water bill, the electricity. The sheer, suffocating loss of privacy in my own home. The next morning, over coffee, I told Brandon no. He nodded, quietly, almost relieved, I thought. Okay, I'll tell Mom. And for about 72 hours, I believed that was the end of it. Then Linda called. Not Brandon, me, directly. On a Friday afternoon while I was at my desk at work, reviewing a property damage claim for a warehouse fire in Naperville. Ashley, honey, I need to talk to you about something. Her voice was warm, concerned, the voice she used when she wanted something. I heard you and Brandon discuss the situation with Diane. We did, and Now, before you say anything, I want you to know I completely understand your hesitation. I do. It's a big ask. But I've been thinking, and I have a solution that I think works for everyone. I should have hung up. I should have said, Linda, this isn't your decision to make, and ended the call. But I was at work, and I was polite, and those 2 things conspired against me. What's your solution? I asked. Well, Diane only needs a room. Stephanie can share with her. They're mother and daughter. They don't mind. So really, you're only giving up the guest room. You keep your office. Marcus sleeps on the couch, but just for a few weeks until he finds work. He's already been applying places. It's barely an inconvenience. She delivered it so smoothly, so reasonably, like she was selling me a timeshare and had practiced the pitch in the mirror. Linda, I appreciate you thinking about it, but the answer is still no. Our house isn't set up for Ashley. Her voice shifted, just a degree. The warmth thinned, and underneath it I could hear the steel. Diane is my sister. She's sleeping in a motel off Route 30 right now. A motel. She's 61 years old and she's living out of a suitcase because her husband of 35 years decided he wanted a younger model. Can you imagine how that feels? Guilt. She wielded it like a scalpel. I'm sorry for Diane's situation, I really am, but family helps family. That's what we do. That's what Whitfields do. There it was, the line in the sand. Whitfields help Whitfields, and I, Ashley Renner Whitfield, was only a Whitfield by marriage certificate. The implication hung in the air like cigarette smoke. I need to get back to work, Linda. Just think about it. That's all I'm asking. Just think. I hung up. My hands were shaking, not from anger, from the dawning realization that this wasn't going to stop. Linda wasn't going to take no for an answer because, in her mind, no wasn't an option I was entitled to give. Over the next 2 weeks, a campaign unfolded. It was subtle at first. Brandon would come home with updates. Mom says Marcus got an interview at a distribution center in Romeoville. He just needs a stable address for the application. Or, Stephanie's been crying every day. Mom's really worried about her. Each update was a brick, and Linda was building a wall around me, one guilt trip at a time. Then the Sunday dinners started changing. Linda began inviting Diane, Stephanie, and Marcus to every family gathering. I'd show up with my 7-layer dip and find 3 strangers sitting in Linda's living room, looking at me with the particular expression of people who'd been told I was the obstacle between them and a roof over their heads. Diane was thin and tired-looking, with gray roots showing through faded auburn hair. She barely spoke to me, but her eyes followed me everywhere. Stephanie was pretty in a washed-out way, scrolling her phone constantly, speaking in monosyllables. Marcus was big, 6'3", broad-shouldered, and surprisingly polite. He shook my hand, called me ma'am, and thanked me for being so understanding. I hadn't been understanding. I'd said no. But apparently in Linda's retelling, I was still deciding. The false hope came in mid-October. Brandon sat me down again, this time with an actual proposal that almost made sense. "What if it's just Diane," he said, "just her, in the guest room. No Stephanie, no Marcus, just my aunt, for 6 weeks, until she finds an apartment. Mom says Stephanie can stay with a friend and Marcus can go to a shelter program in Joliet that helps with job placement." I looked at him. He looked earnest, hopeful, like a kid who'd figured out a compromise with his teacher. "Just Diane," I said, "just Diane. 6 weeks. I'll put it in writing if you want." I laughed at that. He smiled, and against my better judgment, against the voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like my mother, Karen Renner, saying, "Ashley Marie, don't you dare," I agreed. 6 weeks, I said, and she contributes to groceries. Done. Brandon hugged me, kissed my temple. "Thank you, babe. Seriously, you're amazing." 2 days later, Diane moved in. Just Diane. 1 suitcase, 1 box of personal items, a grateful smile that seemed genuine. She was quiet, clean, kept to herself. She washed her own dishes. She bought groceries without being asked, even got the good cheese. I thought, okay, maybe I was wrong. Maybe this is fine. It lasted 9 days. On day 10, I came home from work to find Stephanie sitting on my couch, painting her nails. "Oh, hi, Ashley," she said brightly, like she'd been living there for months. "Aunt Linda dropped me off. My friend's apartment had a mold issue, so I can't stay there anymore. Diane said it was cool if I crashed here for a couple nights." Diane appeared in the hallway, arms crossed, looking at me with an expression I can only describe as defensive anticipation, like she knew I was about to explode and had already prepared her counterargument. "I called Brandon," Diane said quickly. "He said it was fine." "He said it was fine," I repeated slowly. "Just for a couple nights, until the mold situation gets sorted." I pulled out my phone, called Brandon. He picked up on the 4th ring. I could hear the clang of metal in the background. He was still at a job site. "Hey, babe, did you tell Diane that Stephanie could move in?" Silence. 2 seconds. 3. "I said she could stay for a couple nights. It's not moving in." "Brandon, we had a deal. Diane only. You put it in writing. You literally texted me the words, 'Just Diane, 6 weeks, I promise.' I have the text." "Ash, come on. The girl has nowhere to go. It's a couple nights." "And when the couple nights turn into a couple weeks? And when Marcus needs just a couple nights too?" "That's not going to happen." It happened 11 days later. Marcus showed up on a Thursday evening with a duffel bag and a sheepish grin, explaining that the shelter program in Joliet had a 3-month wait list, and Linda said, always Linda said, that he could stay with us just until a spot opened up. I stood in my own doorway and watched a 23-year-old man I barely knew carry his belongings into my living room, and something inside me went very still. Not angry, not sad, still. Like the moment before a building implodes, when the charges have been set and there's nothing left but the countdown. That night, with 4 other adults in my 1,600 square foot house, I lay in bed next to my husband and said, "This is exactly what your mother wanted from the beginning." Brandon didn't answer for a long time. "Maybe," he finally said. "But they're here now. What am I supposed to do, throw them out?" "Yes," I said. "That is exactly what you're supposed to do." "They're family, Ashley." "I'm your family. I'm your wife." He rolled over, faced the wall, and in that gesture, that simple turning away, I felt something shift between us that I knew, with a certainty that made my chest physically ache, would never shift back. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in slow suffocation. My home office was now Stephanie's bedroom. I worked from my bed with my laptop balanced on a pillow, taking claims calls while Stephanie's music bled through the wall. Marcus slept on the couch, which meant the living room was off limits before 9 a.m. and after 10 p.m. Diane had colonized the kitchen, reorganized my cabinets, moved my spices, started cooking dinners without asking, filling the house with smells I didn't choose. The grocery bill tripled. I watched it happen in real time on my banking app. $187 one week, $243 the next, $312 the week after. Brandon didn't notice because Brandon never checked our bank account. That was my job, like everything else that required sustained attention. I said something. Of course I did. I sat Brandon down at the kitchen table, our table, though it didn't feel like ours anymore, and pulled up the numbers on my phone. "We've spent an extra $1,400 on groceries in 3 weeks," I said. "The water bill is up. The electric bill is up. Nobody is contributing a cent." "I'll talk to them," he said. He didn't talk to them. A week later, Linda came to visit. She walked through my house like she was inspecting a hotel she'd booked, checked the guest room where Diane was staying, peeked into the office-turned-bedroom, nodded approvingly at Marcus's setup on the couch. Then she sat down at my kitchen table, in my chair, and smiled at me. "See," she said, "everyone's getting along fine. I knew it would work out." I stared at her. This woman who had engineered every single step, who had played her son like a fiddle and used my empathy as a crowbar. She was sitting in my house, in my chair, smiling at me like she'd won. "Linda," I said, "nobody is paying rent. Nobody is contributing to bills. I've spent over $2,000 in the last month feeding and housing your relatives." Her smile didn't waver. "Family doesn't charge family rent, Ashley. They're not my family." The room went silent. Diane froze in the hallway. Stephanie looked up from her phone. Even Marcus, who was usually invisible, seemed to materialize in the doorway. And Linda? Linda looked at me like I'd slapped her. "Excuse me?" she said, softly, dangerously. "They're your family, Linda. Your sister, your niece and nephew, not mine. I agreed to host Diane for 6 weeks, and instead I have 3 people in my home who I didn't invite and who aren't contributing anything." "Brandon," Linda said, not looking away from me. "Brandon, are you hearing this?" Brandon was standing by the refrigerator. I turned to look at him. My husband, my partner, the man who was supposed to have my back. He looked at his mother. He looked at me. And then he said the words that broke something inside me that I don't think has fully healed to this day. "Ash, maybe you should go stay at your parents' place for a few days, just until everyone cools down." The room hummed with silence. I could hear the refrigerator cycling, the clock on the wall ticking, my own blood rushing in my ears. "You want me to leave," I said. "My house. You want me to leave my own house. Just for a few days. To cool down." Linda was nodding. Actually nodding, like this was the reasonable solution she'd been hoping for all along. And in that moment, looking at my husband choosing his mother's comfort over mine, I understood something with diamond-hard clarity. This wasn't going to get better. There was no conversation, no compromise, no couples therapy session that would fix what was fundamentally broken. Brandon would always choose Linda, every single time. So I smiled. I felt it spread across my face, calm, controlled, and absolutely terrifying to everyone in that room because they expected tears. "Okay," I said. "I'll go to my parents." Linda blinked. Brandon blinked. Even Diane looked startled. "Really?" Brandon said. "I mean, okay, good. Just a few days." "Sure," I said. "Just a few days." I walked to our bedroom, packed one suitcase, took my laptop, my charger, my toiletry bag. I moved slowly, deliberately. No tears, no slamming drawers. On my way out, I stopped in the kitchen. Everyone was still there, watching me like they were witnessing something they couldn't quite categorize. "The Wi-Fi password is on the router," I said pleasantly. "Trash goes out Wednesday, recycling bin goes to the curb, or the HOA sends a letter." Then I walked out of my own front door and drove 37 minutes to my parents' house in Naperville. What none of them knew, not Brandon, not Linda, not Diane or Stephanie or Marcus, was what I did during that drive. Parked in my parents' driveway, engine still running, I opened my banking app. I looked at the joint checking account, $4,218.32. I looked at the joint savings, $43,600. We'd dipped into it. And then I looked at something none of them even knew existed, my personal account, the one in my name only, at a completely different bank, the one I'd opened 2 years ago when Linda first started testing boundaries, when a tiny voice in the back of my mind whispered, "just in case." It had $11,400 in it, small transfers, birthday money from my parents, my annual bonus that I'd quietly redirected. I sat in that driveway and I made a decision. Not in anger, in clarity. But I didn't act on it yet, not that night. That night, I walked into my parents' house, let my mother wrap me in a hug that smelled like downy and cinnamon, and I slept 12 hours straight in my childhood bed under a quilt my grandmother made. The acting came the next morning, and when it did, it set off a chain of events that not a single person in that house in Plainfield saw coming. I woke up at 6:47 a.m. in my childhood bed, and for about 3 seconds, I didn't remember. The quilt was warm. The house smelled like my dad's coffee. He always brewed it too strong. Folgers and a Mr. Coffee machine that was older than me. For 3 seconds, I was just Ashley Renner, home for a visit, safe and small and unbothered. Then it hit. The memory of Brandon's face, Linda's nodding, Stephanie's nail polish on my couch, Marcus's duffel bag in my living room, and my own voice, calm and smiling, saying, "Okay, I'll go." I pulled the quilt over my head and lay there, breathing in the smell of old cotton and lavender dryer sheets, and I let myself feel it, all of it. The humiliation of being asked to leave my own home, the rage that sat in my chest like a hot coal, the grief, because that's what it was, grief, for the marriage I'd thought I had, the husband I'd thought I'd married. My phone was on the nightstand. I picked it up. No texts from Brandon, not one. His wife had left their home the night before with a single suitcase, and he hadn't even sent a, "Did you get there safe?" Nothing. I checked twice, thinking maybe I'd missed it. I hadn't. But there was a text from Linda, sent at 11:14 p.m. the previous night, barely 2 hours after I'd walked out. "Ashley, I think this is really mature of you. Sometimes space is the best thing. Take a few days and clear your head. We'll hold down the fort." We'll hold down the fort. My fort. My mortgage. My 1,600 square feet that I paid for with my salary while her son contributed less than half. And she'd signed it with a smiley face. I stared at that emoji until my vision blurred. Then I put the phone face down on the nightstand and didn't touch it for 2 hours. My mom found me at 9, still in bed. Karen Renner, 61, 5'6", a retired middle school principal who once made a 6th grader cry by simply raising one eyebrow, sat on the edge of my bed and didn't say a word. She just put her hand on my back and waited. Brandon asked me to leave. I said into the pillow. I know, sweetheart. You told us last night. I keep thinking I dreamed it. You didn't. Mom, I pay 70% of that mortgage. The house is in both our names, but the down payment, $22,000, that came from my savings, before we were even married. I furnished it. I maintained it. I painted every room in that house myself because Brandon said he'd get to it, and never did. My mother's hand stilled on my back. Ashley, look at me. I rolled over. Her face was calm, but her eyes, my mother's eyes, were doing that thing they did when she was furious and containing it, like watching someone hold a lid on a boiling pot. What are you going to do? She asked. I don't know yet. Yes, you do. You've always known what to do. You just need to decide you're allowed to do it. She left, closed the door gently, and I lay there, staring at my ceiling. The same ceiling I'd stared at as a teenager, wondering what my life would become. And I started to think, really think, not with my heart, which was shattered, with my brain, which was not. Here's what I knew. The house in Plainfield was jointly owned, both names on the deed, both names on the mortgage. But the down payment was mine. I had bank records to prove it. The joint checking account had $4,218.32 in it. The joint savings had $43,600. My personal account, the one nobody knew about, had $11,400. I also knew something else, something I hadn't told Brandon because it hadn't mattered until now. My salary, my $94,000 salary, was direct deposited into the joint checking account. Every 2 weeks, $2,847.63 after taxes and 401k contributions landed in that account, and from that account flowed the mortgage, the utilities, the car payments, the insurance, the groceries, everything. Brandon's checks went in too, but his covered maybe 40% of our expenses. The rest was me. If I redirected my direct deposit, that joint account would drain like a bathtub with the plug pulled. Within 2 weeks, there wouldn't be enough to cover the mortgage payment, let alone feed 5 adults. I thought about that, turned it over in my mind like a stone. It felt dangerous. It felt vindictive. It felt like something Linda would do. But it also felt like the first rational thought I'd had in weeks. I didn't do it yet, not that morning. Instead, I did something harder. I went to work, drove 40 minutes from Naperville to the office downtown, sat at my desk, processed claims, answered emails, and pretended my life wasn't imploding. My coworker Jennifer, the only person at work I'd call a real friend, noticed immediately. You look like you slept in a ditch, she said, setting a coffee on my desk. My parents' house, actually. What? I told her, the abbreviated version, the relatives, the guilt trips, the escalation, Brandon telling me to leave. Jennifer listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her, and when I finished, she said something that cracked something open inside me. Ashley, that's abuse. I flinched. It's not. He didn't hit me. Nobody hit me. He removed you from your own home to make room for people his mother chose. He prioritized her comfort over your safety and stability. That is a form of abuse, and the fact that you're sitting here processing fire claims instead of calling a lawyer tells me you haven't accepted that yet. I opened my mouth to argue, closed it, opened it again. I don't want a divorce, I whispered. I didn't say divorce, I said lawyer. There's a difference. A lawyer tells you your options. What you do with those options is up to you. She wrote a name on a Post-it note, slid it across my desk. Rachel Torres, family law. She handled my sister's custody case. She's not cheap, but she's a pit bull in heels. I took the Post-it, put it in my wallet. Didn't call. Not yet. That night, back at my parents' house, I finally checked my phone properly. 3 texts from Brandon. 5:12 p.m. Hey, how was work? 5:14 p.m. Mom made pot roast tonight. Diane helped. 5:47 p.m. Miss you. Come home soon, okay? I read them 3 times. Mom made pot roast tonight. In my kitchen, using my pots, probably my groceries, and he was reporting it to me like it was charming, like I should be happy that the woman who'd orchestrated my removal from my own home was now cooking in it. I didn't respond. The next morning, I woke to a voicemail from Linda, the one I described at the beginning of this story, the panicked one about the card declining. Except I need to correct myself because the timeline matters. That voicemail didn't come the next morning. It came 4 days later. And what happened in those 4 days is what changed everything. Day 1 after I left. Silence. I went to work, came back to Naperville, ate dinner with my parents. My dad, Michael Renner, a retired electrician who communicates primarily through meaningful looks and the occasional devastating one-liner, said exactly one thing about my situation. That boy's spine is made of wet spaghetti. Then he went back to watching Jeopardy. Day 2, Brandon called. I let it ring. He left a voicemail. Hey babe, just checking in. Everyone's settling in great here. Mom says hi. Come home whenever you're ready. No rush. No rush. I could take my time returning to my own home. How generous. Day 3, I called Rachel Torres. Her office was in a glass building on Washington Street, 14th floor. She was small, maybe 5'2", with black hair pulled tight and reading glasses she kept pushing up her nose. She didn't offer me coffee or small talk. She sat down, clicked a pen, and said, "Tell me everything. Don't editorialize, just facts." So I gave her facts. The house, the mortgage, the down payment documentation, the joint accounts, the income disparity, the relatives, Brandon's request that I leave, Linda's involvement. Rachel took notes for 20 minutes straight. Then she put down her pen and looked at me over her glasses. Here's what you need to understand, Ashley. Illinois is an equitable distribution state, not community property. If this goes to divorce, the court divides assets based on fairness, not 50-50. Your documented contributions to the down payment, your higher income, your evidence that you were effectively forced out of the marital home, all of that matters. I told you I don't want a divorce. And I heard you, but I want you to understand something. She leaned forward. Right now, you are paying the mortgage, utilities, and groceries for a house you've been asked to leave, which is currently occupied by your husband and 3 people you didn't agree to house. Every day that continues, you're hemorrhaging money and establishing a precedent. What kind of precedent? The kind where a judge might look at the situation and say, well, she was clearly fine with the arrangement. She kept paying for it. You need to protect yourself financially, today, not next week. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat on her desk. What do I do? Rachel Torres smiled. It was the kind of smile that made me understand why Jennifer had called her a pit bull. First, you redirect your direct deposit to your personal account. Your employer can process that in 24 hours. Second, you do not close the joint accounts. That looks adversarial in court. You simply stop feeding them. Third, you document everything. Every text, every voicemail, every dollar spent. Fourth, and this is critical, you do not go back to that house until we have a legal framework in place. I left her office with a $3,500 retainer agreement and a feeling I hadn't experienced in months. Control. Not happiness, not peace. Control. The feeling that my hands were back on the wheel of my own life and that the road ahead, while terrifying, was at least mine to drive. That afternoon, I logged into my company's HR portal from my phone, sitting in my car in the parking garage. I changed my direct deposit, rerouted my entire paycheck, every cent of it, from the joint checking account to my personal account at a different bank. The change would take effect with my next pay cycle, which was in 3 days. Then I did something else, something Rachel hadn't told me to do, but something I knew I needed. I opened my phone and called my parents' landline. Yes, they still had one. My mother refused to give it up. "Mom," I said, I need to tell you and Dad something tonight. All of it. Everything." That evening, sitting at the kitchen table where I'd done homework as a kid, I laid it all out. The finances, the lawyer, the plan. My mother listened with her hands folded. My father listened with his jaw tight. When I finished, my mom reached across the table, took both my hands and said, "You stay here as long as you need. This is your home. It always has been." My dad stood up, walked to the kitchen counter, and came back with a check. He set it in front of me. $5,000. "Dad, I can't." "It's not charity. It's backup. You're going to war, kid. Wars cost money." I cried then. For the first time since leaving Plainfield, I actually cried. Ugly, gasping sobs that shook my whole body. My face pressed into my mother's shoulder, while my father's hand rested heavy and warm on the back of my head. I cried for my marriage, for my house, for the version of my life that was dying. And when I was done, I dried my face, folded the check into my wallet next to Rachel Torres's card, and felt something new settle into the space where the grief had been. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was resolve. Cold and clean and diamond hard, like the edge of a blade that's just been sharpened. Day 4. The day the dominoes started falling. My paycheck didn't hit the joint account. Instead, $2,847.63 landed quietly in my personal account at 6 a.m. By 9 a.m., Linda was calling. By 10 a.m., she'd called 6 times. By noon, 17 calls and 3 voicemails, each one escalating from confused to frantic to furious. I listened to all of them, sitting on my childhood bed. And I was already on my laptop pulling up every financial record I had, building the case file Rachel Torres had asked for. Every receipt, every bank statement, every text message where Brandon had promised, "Just Diane, 6 weeks." I screenshotted them all, organized them into folders, and emailed them to my lawyer. Then I opened a new browser tab, typed in the address of a locksmith in Plainfield, and bookmarked the page. Not yet, but soon. My phone buzzed again. Not Linda this time. Brandon. "Ash, what the hell is going on? Mom says the card got declined at Jewel Osco. Did something happen with the bank?" I stared at the screen. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. I typed 4 words, deleted them, typed them again, deleted them again. Finally, I set the phone down without responding. Let them wonder. Let them sit in that house, my house, and feel for the first time the weight of what it costs to keep a life running. Let them open the refrigerator and see it getting emptier. Let them check the account balance and watch the numbers shrink. Let them understand, in the most visceral way possible, exactly whose money had been keeping that roof over their heads. Because the next phase of my plan wasn't about money. It was about the house itself. And what Rachel Torres had told me during our second phone call that afternoon, the thing that made me grip my phone so hard the case cracked, changed everything I thought I knew about my own marriage. "Ashley," she'd said, her voice careful and precise, "I pulled the property records on your Plainfield address. There's something you need to see." "Ashley," she'd said, her voice careful and precise, "I pulled the property records on your Plainfield address. There's something you need to see." I gripped the phone. "What do you mean?" "When you purchased the house, before the marriage, correct?" "Yes, I bought it 8 months before the wedding. Brandon moved in after we got married." "That's what I thought. And you added him to the deed after the wedding?" "He asked me to, said it would make it feel like our home. I did it about 6 months after the ceremony." "Right. Here's the thing." Rachel paused. I could hear her clicking through documents on her computer. "You added him to the deed, but the mortgage was never refinanced into both names. The mortgage is solely in your name, Ashley Renner, your maiden name, in fact. It was never even updated." I blinked. "What does that mean?" It means you are the only person legally obligated to pay that mortgage. Brandon's name is on the deed as a co-owner, but he has zero financial liability for the loan. If payments stop, the bank comes after you, not him, you. I know that sounds bad, Rachel continued, but in our situation, it's actually leverage. Because here's the flip side. You're the one the bank cares about. You're the borrower. And right now, you're paying for a home you've been displaced from while your husband houses people without your consent. Any family court judge in Cook County is going to have a very strong opinion about that. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 15 minutes after that call, engine off, hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, staring at nothing. The mortgage was mine. The income was mine, the down payment was mine, and I'd been the one asked to leave. Something crystallized in that moment. Not a plan, I already had a plan. A conviction. The absolute, unshakable certainty that I was done bending. Day 5. I called Brandon. He picked up on the first ring. Ash, finally! What's going on with the bank account? Mom's been... Brandon, I need you to listen to me. Don't interrupt. Silence. Startled silence. I'd never spoken to him in that tone. I've hired a lawyer. Her name is Rachel Torres. She'll be reaching out to you this week. I've redirected my direct deposit to a personal account because I will not continue funding a household I was asked to leave. The mortgage payment is due on the 1st. That's 9 days from now. If it's not paid, it affects my credit, not yours since the loan is only in my name. So I will be making that payment directly to the lender from my own account. But everything else, utilities, groceries, gas, whatever your mother and her relatives need, that's no longer my responsibility. I could hear him breathing. Fast. Shallow. Ash, you can't just... I can. I am. And one more thing. Rachel has advised me to formally request that Diane, Stephanie, and Marcus vacate the property within 14 days. You'll receive that in writing. If they're not out, we pursue legal remedies. This is not a negotiation. You're blowing this up. Over what? Over a few house guests? Over you choosing your mother over your wife. Over being told to leave my own home. Over 3 people I didn't invite eating food I paid for in rooms I furnished. Pick whichever reason you like, Brandon. They're all valid. He hung up. I expected that. What I didn't expect was what happened 3 hours later. Linda showed up at my parents' house. My mother answered the door. I was upstairs, but I heard every word through the heating vent. The same vent I used to eavesdrop through as a teenager when my parents argued about whether I could go to prom with Danny Kowalski. Karen, I need to speak with Ashley. Linda's voice, controlled but tight, like a wire about to snap. My mother's voice, calm as a frozen lake. Linda, my daughter doesn't want to see you right now. This is between me and her. She's destroying her marriage over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. My mother repeated it flatly. You moved 3 people into her home, had her husband tell her to leave, and you're calling it a misunderstanding? Family helps family, Karen. I'm sorry if that's a foreign concept to... Don't. One word. My mother's principal voice. The voice that could silence a cafeteria of 300 12-year-olds. Don't you dare come to my home and lecture me about family. My daughter paid for that house. My daughter funded that life, and you treated her like a tenant who'd overstayed her welcome. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to get back in your car, drive back to Plainfield, and tell those relatives of yours to start packing. Because my daughter has a lawyer, Linda. A very good one. Silence. Then the sound of Linda's car pulling away. My mother appeared in my doorway 2 minutes later, not even slightly ruffled. She won't be back, she said simply. And she was right. The next 7 days unfolded with the precision of a legal machine. Rachel Torres sent a formal letter to Brandon, certified mail, signature required, requesting the removal of all non-resident occupants within 14 days. She also filed a motion with the court, documenting my displacement from the marital home, including screenshots of Brandon's text, Just Diane, 6 weeks, I promise. Linda's smiley face text, and the bank statements showing $3,200 in excess spending during the occupation. Brandon called me twice during that week. The first time, he was angry. "You lawyered up? Seriously? Without even talking to me?" "I tried talking to you, Brandon. You told me to go to my parents' house." The second time, he was scared. His voice was different, smaller, younger. "Ash, Marcus and Stephanie left yesterday. They're staying at some motel. Diane's packing. Mom's furious. She says you're tearing the family apart." "Good," I said. "They should have left 3 weeks ago." "What about us?" I closed my eyes. This was the question I'd been dreading. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because saying it out loud would make it irreversible. "I don't know, Brandon. I honestly don't know if there's an us to come back to." He started crying. Quietly, the way men cry when they've never learned how to do it properly. Swallowed sounds, sharp breaths. And I felt it in my chest, that old tenderness, that reflex to comfort him. But I didn't, because tenderness was the leash they'd kept me on for 6 years, and I'd finally slipped the collar. On day 12, Diane moved out. I know because Brandon sent me a photo of the empty guest room, like proof of compliance. The bed was stripped. The closet was open and bare. On the nightstand was a note from Diane that read, "Ashley, I'm sorry. I didn't realize. Thank you for your kindness." I stared at that note for a long time. I believed her. Diane had been a pawn, too. On day 14, I drove back to Plainfield, not to reconcile, to assess. Rachel came with me. We walked through the house together while Brandon sat on the couch, watching us with red-rimmed eyes. The house was a mess. Not destroyed, but neglected in the way a place gets when too many people live in it without anyone taking ownership. Stains on the carpet, a crack in the bathroom mirror. My office, the room Stephanie had occupied, smelled like stale perfume and had nail polish marks on the desk I'd bought from IKEA and assembled myself. Rachel documented everything. Photos, notes, timestamps. Brandon didn't say a word. When we were done, I stood in my living room, and looked at my husband. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. Something else had shrunk. "Brandon," I said, "your mother orchestrated this entire thing. She manipulated you, she manipulated me, and she used Diane and Stephanie and Marcus as chess pieces. You know that, right?" He nodded slowly. "I know. And when I told you multiple times that it was wrong, you chose her. Every single time." "I know." His voice cracked. "I thought I was doing the right thing." "You thought you were doing the easy thing. There's a difference." He looked at the floor, and I said the thing I'd been carrying for 2 weeks, the thing that sat in my chest like a stone. "I'm filing for divorce, Brandon." He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He just nodded one more time and said, "I'm sorry, Ash." "I know you are," I said, "but sorry doesn't rebuild what you let her tear down." The divorce took 4 months. Equitable distribution, like Rachel said. I kept the house, bought out Brandon's share for $31,000, which was fair given that my down payment had been $22,000 and I'd paid the vast majority of the mortgage. He kept his truck and his 401k. We split the joint savings. I got $26,000, he got $17,600. Clean, surgical. The judge noted in her written opinion that my involuntary displacement from the marital home was a significant factor. Linda tried to come to the final hearing. Rachel had her removed from the courtroom. I didn't look back. That was 11 months ago. I'm sitting in my house in Plainfield right now, writing this. The office is an office again. My desk by the window, my laptop, my files. The guest room has a new bed, a real one, queen-sized, for when my parents visit. The living room is mine. The kitchen is mine. The silence is mine. I'm 33 years old, divorced. My credit score is 781. My savings account has $38,000 in it. I got a raise, $101,000 now. Dennis, my financial advisor, says I'm back on track. Jennifer at work says I look like a different person. My dad says I look like myself again. Brandon moved to an apartment in Joliet, closer to Linda. I hear from mutual friends that she visits him 3 times a week. She got what she wanted in the end, her son, all to herself. Sometimes, late at night, I still reach for the other side of the bed. Muscle memory. I find cold sheets and empty space, and for a moment, just a moment, I miss the weight of another person beside me. Then I remember. The weight I was carrying wasn't love. It was obligation dressed up in a wedding ring. My mother told me something the week I moved back into my house. We were standing in the kitchen, unpacking a box of dishes. New ones I'd chosen myself. And she held up a coffee mug and said, "You know the difference between bending and breaking, Ashley? Bending means you can still straighten up. Breaking means someone else decides your shape." I took the mug from her, poured myself coffee, sat in my chair at my table in my house. Nobody decides my shape anymore.